Hello fellow outsiders, and welcome to today's episode. I thought that today would be a great day to do a fire steel beginner's tutorial. A lot of people buy these without really knowing how to use them. It seems simple, but there's a few tricks that you can do to make it a lot easier to start a fire with them. So people buy them, get frustrated, and end up not using them because they've never really realized how to use them. So I just have a few tips and tricks for those of you beginning with fire steels, and if you've been using fire steels for a while, you might even learn a couple extra new things. The first thing that I like to recommend with getting a fire steel is that you buy the proper one. And a lot of fire steel companies like to advertise that their fire steel can take up to 30,000 strikes or whatever it is, that it can last a long time, but that's actually a bit of a gimmick. Really what that means is that their product is inferior. When fire steel advertises that it can withstand a lot of strikes, it's only because the material that they use is too hard. And so every time you make a strike, there's not a lot of material coming off of it, and therefore you don't have a lot of spark. And so it's good to get a fire steel that has softer material, and so every time you strike it, there's more material coming off, which means a much bigger spark, which is what you want if you want to start a fire. So I like to look at companies that advertise maybe 3,000 strikes or less when it comes to using their fire steel. And a lot of companies may not even advertise how many strikes is needed or how many strikes they last for. But I do recommend Light My fire steels. They have a smaller model and a larger fire steel, which is about the size of this one. But this isn't a Light My fire steel. This is a Collins fire steel, and I'm just testing it out today to see how it works. So now that you've bought your fire steel and selected the one that you like, I highly recommend getting a fire steel with a striker. I've used the back of my knife before to light fires, but I find that a striker is much better, and that's because strikers are specially designed to get the most material off of your fire steel with every strike. So definitely get one with a good striker. And with this striker, maybe I'll give you a close-up so you can see, but one side of the striker works better than the other. And you'll see that the front side of this striker, the edge is kind of soft and curved a bit, and it's hard to throw sparks with that side. But if you turn it over to the back side of the striker, you can see there's a bit of a lip around the edges, and you're going to want to use that lip to scrape the fire steel, because that's going to basically claw off as much material as it can, which again creates a much bigger spark. And so make sure you do that. Not all strikers have the lip on the edge, in which case you just use whatever side you want, but just make sure to look for that when you use your striker. The next thing that you'll need to do with your fire steel is to look at the rod here, and you'll see that it's black in color usually, and that's because there's a special coating on the rod to keep it from rusting or from being damaged before you start using it. And what some people don't realize is that this coating needs to be scratched off first, either with your knife or with your scraper, before it will actually start throwing sparks. And so I've known some people to buy a fire steel to try and get it to work, and it's not throwing a spark, and really they're just starting to get the coating off, and then they've already given up, and they think that the fire steel doesn't work. So when you get your first fire steel, you're going to want to make sure to thoroughly scrape off the black coating, and then you'll start to notice that the sparks will get bigger and bigger as you expose the actual fire steel to the scraper. As well, I like getting fire steels with a good handle on the end to grab onto. The bigger, the better it is. A lot of fire steels are very short and small, and that is fine if it's a good fire steel, but I always say that more material is better to work with, especially when you're starting out learning how to light a fire with your fire steel. Wow, it's raining a lot today. This is a good day to test the fire steel out. It's a really wet and soggy day, so we're going to see how this does. When you're starting out with your fire steel, the best thing to do is to do something that's easy. Don't just go off into the bush and try and light some twigs on fire or something. Even with a fire steel, you need the right material to start a fire with. And so I would recommend to start out, just to get comfortable with your fire steel, to use a cotton ball and to try throwing sparks on a cotton ball outside, obviously, not indoors, because fire is dangerous. But take it outdoors and throw your sparks on a cotton ball, and that'll be kind of a way that you can get comfortable with it, because obviously cotton balls take sparks really quickly. And as well, what I like to do when I first started camping with my fire steel is I would always take a handful of cotton balls with me so that I could use it to start a fire. But as well, I would take a bit of Vaseline, or for my friends in the UK, petroleum jelly. And the reason why I carry Vaseline and cotton balls with me, again, to start fires in the beginning, but as well, Vaseline I find is really good if I cut myself in the bush, if I need to keep working. Sometimes a Band-Aid doesn't work. I'm too sweaty, I'm too dirty for the Band-Aid to stay on, or maybe I'm bleeding a little bit too much. But often I'll just take a bit of Vaseline and smear it on my cut, and that'll be enough to stop the bleeding and seal it for a time until I can get my work done and get out of the bush. But anyways, what I like to do when it comes to starting fires for the first time with my fire steel is to take a cotton ball and to dip it in Vaseline and throw a spark on that. And the reason for that is because the cotton ball and the Vaseline together make a sort of really basic candle. The cotton ball acts as a sort of wick, and the Vaseline acts as the wax that holds the flame for a longer amount of time so that you can build up a proper fire around your cotton ball. A cotton ball by itself burns off rather quickly, but when it's dipped in Vaseline, your cotton ball can burn for several minutes before it goes out, and by then you should have a pretty good fire built up. So as you can see with the petroleum jelly or the Vaseline and cotton ball, it has now been around 4 or 5 minutes and it's still burning quite strong. And so you can see how effective the combination of the two is. Now when it comes to striking your fire steel over your cotton ball or whatever it is that you're doing, I see a lot of people who try and strike it as quickly as they can and try and throw a spark as fast as they can, but that often isn't too effective. It's better to be slower and press harder on the fire steel rather than just quickly do some quick strikes on it, because that only throws a bit of spark off into the cotton ball or whatever it is that you're aiming at. But like I said, slow and steady wins the race. Make sure that you put a lot of pressure on the fire steel, and if you're slower, that's fine as long as you've got good pressure. Just like that. And the last thing that I recommend is that you aim the rod at whatever it is that you're trying to start a fire with. And that seems like a very simple piece of instruction, but what I found with myself when I first started learning how to use a fire steel is I kind of aimed the rod up and like over the material that I was trying to set on fire. So when I struck the fire steel, I would shower sparks over the kindling, and I would miss a lot of the kindling with my sparks. And because I kind of imagined that when I struck the sparks that they would kind of fall and shower down on the kindling. But if you watch people using fire steels in slow motion on a side view, you'll see that the sparks generally shoot straight off of the end of the rod. And so it's very important that you aim the rod down at what you're trying to hit. And as well, when it comes to striking, I know some people recommend different techniques, and you have to find what's best for you. But what I find is best is to try my hardest to pull the rod away and hold my striking hand firmly in place, rather than just trying to push off all the time, because generally what happens when you do that is you end up hitting your own pile of tinder with your striking hand and stopping it from catching the spark.
There we go.
Yeah, some of these pieces are, pretty much all these pieces are going to have to dry out because it's so wet right now.
Yeah, especially this stuff.
Yeah. But that's what I love about birch bark. It really takes the fire well.
Yeah, and it is burning already.
Yeah. Even when it's wet, it's got that oil inside of it that is very, very flammable. Another thing that I would like to remind beginners of is that when you buy your fire steel, it comes with a striker on the string here. but make sure you take the striker off of the string and separate it out, because otherwise it's way too hard to strike the fire steel if it's still on the string. And to some people this might be kind of a common sense thing, but it's amazing what we can forget or what we miss when we're first learning something. So again, make sure to take that striker off the string first before you use it on the fire steel. And most importantly, be persistent.